HOA tried selling Blackfather's farm while deployed, but his kids took back the land. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late August, slipped through the mail slot like every other piece of correspondence. But this one was different. This one had the power to destroy everything. 16-year-old Marcus Williams stood in the kitchen of the farmhouse his great-grandfather had built in 1947, staring at the certified letter addressed to the current occupant of 1847 Meadowbrook Lane. His younger sister Nia, 14, peered over his shoulder, her braids tickling his arm. "What is it?" she asked. Marcus's hands trembled as he read the words again, hoping he'd misunderstood. But the meaning was crystal clear. Notice of foreclosure and property sale. This property has been deemed abandoned per HOA Bylaws Section 14.3. Sale scheduled for September 15, 2023. All occupants must vacate within 30 days. "They can't do this," Marcus whispered. "Dad owns this land, free and clear. Grandpa made sure of that before he died." Nia grabbed the letter, her dark eyes scanning the text. "Abandoned, we live here. How is it abandoned?" "Call Dad," Marcus said, already reaching for his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen. No, Dad was somewhere in the Middle East on his second deployment in 3 years. Staff Sergeant Daniel Williams, U.S. Army, keeping the world safe while someone tried to steal his home. The home that had been in their family for 76 years. Marcus looked out the kitchen window at the 40 acres his great-grandfather had purchased with every penny he'd saved working double shifts at the steel mill. Land that had been farmed, fought for, and protected through decades when black ownership meant something more than a deed. It meant defiance, dignity, survival. "We need to figure this out ourselves," Marcus said. "Dad has enough to worry about." Part 2. Background setup ***. 6 months earlier, life on the Williams farm had been as close to perfect as Marcus could imagine. His father had been home on leave, and they'd spent long afternoons walking the property lines, checking the fences that separated their 40 acres from the neighboring developments that had sprouted up like weeds over the past decade. "See that marker?" Daniel had pointed to an old surveyor's stone, half-buried and moss-covered. "Your great-grandfather put that there himself, made sure every boundary was recorded, notarized, filed 6 ways from Sunday. He knew what this land meant. Not just to us, but what it represented." Marcus had heard the stories his whole life. How Samuel Williams had arrived in Pennsylvania after the war, the first war, the one his father had fought in, the one they didn't talk about much. How Samuel had worked at the steel mill for 23 years, saving every dollar, dealing with discrimination and danger, until he had enough to buy this land from a widow who needed cash more than she needed principle. "White folks didn't like it," Daniel had continued, his voice steady but weighted with history. "They tried everything to stop the sale, threats, bribes, intimidation, but Mrs. Henderson, God rest her soul, she sold to the man who offered the most money and had it in hand. Your great-grandfather." The farmhouse Samuel built still stood strong, its bones solid despite the years. 3 bedrooms upstairs, kitchen and living room downstairs, a wraparound porch that caught the evening breeze. They didn't farm commercially anymore. Daniel worked at the VA hospital when he wasn't deployed, but they kept a garden, raised chickens, maintained the land. "This is yours," Daniel had told Marcus and Nia that afternoon. "Both of you, no matter what happens to me, this land stays in our family. I've made sure of it. Everything's documented, paid off, protected." 3 weeks later, Daniel had deployed again. This time to a place he couldn't tell them about, doing work he couldn't describe, for a duration he couldn't predict. 6 months, maybe, he'd said at the airport, pulling both kids into a fierce hug. "Maybe longer, you two watch out for each other. Marcus, you're the man of the house now." Marcus had nodded, trying to look more confident than he felt. 16 wasn't man enough, not really, but he'd do his best. For the first few months, everything had gone smoothly. Marcus got his driver's license and drove himself and Nia to school. They maintained the property, kept up with the garden, checked in regularly with Mrs. Patterson next door, though next door meant a quarter-mile down the road. The neighbors had always been respectful, friendly even. Many of them remembered Samuel, respected what his farm represented. But things began to change in late spring. The Meadowbrook Lane Homeowners Association had formed the previous year, primarily to maintain the new developments, the cookie-cutter houses with their uniform lawns and matching mailboxes that had consumed the old Miller farm and the Peterson property. Marcus hadn't paid much attention. The Williams farm had existed long before any HOA, had never been part of any development, and wasn't subject to their rules. Or so he'd thought. The first letter arrived in May, addressed to Daniel Williams. "Notice of noncompliance with HOA standards," it read. The list of violations was absurd. Grass exceeding approved height, unapproved exterior paint colors, unauthorized structures, the chicken coop Samuel had built in 1952, vehicles parked on grass, their pickup truck, which had always sat by the barn. Marcus had laughed it off, shown it to Mrs. Patterson. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart," she'd said, her weathered face creasing with concern. "You're not in their HOA. Never have been, this is some kind of mistake." But the letters kept coming. June brought more violations. July brought threats of fines. August brought legal language Marcus didn't fully understand, words like covenant enforcement and community standards and eminent domain. And now this, foreclosure, sale, abandonment, on land his family owned outright. Marcus looked at his sister, saw the fear in her eyes that probably mirrored his own. "We need help," Nia said quietly. "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "We do." Part 3. Gradual degradation. The next morning, Marcus and Nia sat across from Mr. Henderson at the kitchen table. James Henderson was a retired lawyer, a friend of their grandfather's, and had been handling minor legal matters for the family for years. He'd drawn up Daniel's will, dealt with the paperwork when their mother died 4 years ago, and served as a kind of unofficial guardian while their father was deployed. Mr. Henderson read through the foreclosure notice, his dark face growing increasingly grim. He was 73, with gray hair and gentle eyes that had seen too much injustice to be surprised by anything, but this clearly troubled him. "This is predatory," he said finally, "and I'm not sure it's legal." "But can they do it?" Marcus asked. "Can they actually take our land?" Mr. Henderson set the letter down carefully. "Let me explain what's happening here. About 8 months ago, the Meadowbrook HOA filed something called an expanded boundary petition with the county. Essentially, they claimed that your property should have been included in their original development plan and that its exclusion was a clerical error." "But that's a lie," Nia interjected. "Our farm has been here for 76 years. The developments are new." "I know, baby girl, I know." Mr. Henderson's voice was patient. "But here's where it gets complicated. The HOA is being run by a man named Richard Thornton. You know him?" Marcus shook his head. "He moved here from New York about 2 years ago, bought one of those big houses in the new section. He's a real estate developer, or was before he semi-retired. He's also got connections, money, and from what I hear, very particular ideas about how neighborhoods should look." "What does that mean?" Nia asked, though Marcus suspected they both already knew. Mr. Henderson sighed deeply. "It means, sweetheart, that some people look at your beautiful historic farm and don't see history or heritage. They see valuable land that could be developed, subdivided, turned into 8 or 10 luxury homes worth $300,000–400,000 each." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "So this is about money." "Money and control," Mr. Henderson confirmed. "And probably, though I hate to say it, about the fact that you're a black family sitting on prime real estate in what's becoming a very white, very affluent area." The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus had grown up hearing stories about redlining, discrimination, the ways black families had been systematically prevented from building and keeping wealth. But those were historical stories, things from his great-grandfather's time, not something that happened in 2023. Except here it was happening. "What can we do?" Marcus asked. Mr. Henderson pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. "First, I'm going to file an emergency motion to halt the sale. The notice says September 15, which gives us about 3 weeks. Second, I'm going to request all the documentation on how they claim your property became part of their HOA. That boundary expansion never should have been approved without your father's consent, and I want to see exactly how it happened. Third," he paused, looking at both of them seriously. "Third, you two need to document everything, every interaction, every letter, every person who comes to your property. Keep a journal, take pictures, save every piece of paper." "You think they'll try something else?" Nia asked. "I think people who are willing to go this far are willing to go further," Mr. Henderson said grimly. "And I think you need to be careful." Over the following days, Marcus began to understand what Mr. Henderson meant. The pressure didn't let up, it intensified. On Wednesday, a man in an expensive suit appeared at their door, introducing himself as a representative of the HOA board. His name was Charles Westbrook, and he had the kind of smile that made Marcus's skin crawl, too white, too perfect, too practiced. "I understand there's been some confusion about the property status," Westbrook said, standing on their porch without being invited in. "I wanted to come personally to explain the situation and, frankly, offer you kids a way out that might be beneficial for everyone." "We're not interested," Marcus said, starting to close the door. Westbrook put his hand out, stopping it. "Hear me out. This property is now subject to significant HOA fines, about $40,000 in accumulated violations. Even if you fight the foreclosure, those fines are legitimate. You'd owe them anyway. We don't owe anything, Nia said from behind Marcus. We're not in your HOA. Westbrook's smile never wavered. According to the county records, you are. Now I know this is overwhelming for two kids on their own. Your father's deployed, your situation is difficult. The HOA is willing to be generous. We'll buy the property for market value, that's $200,000, and waive all the fines. You walk away with cash, no legal troubles, and you can find somewhere more suitable for your circumstances. Get off our property, Marcus said quietly. Think about it, Westbrook continued, pulling out a business card. That's a lot of money for two teenagers, more than you've probably ever seen, enough to start over somewhere better, somewhere you'd fit in. The card landed on the porch, and Westbrook walked back to his silver Mercedes, his expensive shoes crunching on their gravel driveway. Marcus picked up the card and tore it in half. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Westbrook's words, somewhere you'd fit in. As if they didn't belong on land their family had owned for 3/4 of a century. As if 40 acres of history could be reduced to market value and a check. The harassment escalated. On Thursday, a code enforcement officer appeared, citing them for violations Marcus couldn't even understand. Insufficient setback from property line for a barn that had been there since 1953. Unpermitted structure for their grandfather's workshop. Environmental concerns about the chicken coop. On Friday, their mailbox was knocked over. On Saturday, someone dumped trash on their driveway. On Sunday, a car parked across their entrance, blocking them in for 2 hours before finally leaving. They're trying to make us give up, Nia said, helping Marcus clean up another load of garbage someone had dumped near their mailbox. They're trying to make us so miserable we'll just leave. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead. It was late August, Pennsylvania humid, and his arms ached from hauling trash bags. Well, they don't know us very well then. But privately, Marcus was scared. What if Mr. Henderson couldn't stop the sale? What if the legal system that had failed so many black families before failed them too? What if Westbrook was right, and they were just two kids in over their heads? That night, Marcus went up to his father's room, the room they'd left unchanged since Daniel deployed, as if preserving it might protect him somehow. He sat on the bed and pulled out the letters his father had sent. There weren't many. Daniel couldn't say much about what he was doing or where he was, but there was one line repeated in nearly every letter. Take care of our land, it's the most important thing we have. Marcus folded the letter carefully and put it back in the box. Then he went downstairs and found Nia in the living room, scrolling through her phone. We need to fight this, he said. Really fight, not just with lawyers and papers. We need to figure out exactly what they're doing and why, and we need to stop them. Nia looked up, and Marcus saw something fierce in her eyes. Where do we start? Part 4. Discovery phase. The Meadowbrook County Records Office was a squat, ugly building downtown, all concrete and fluorescent lights. Marcus and Nia arrived on Monday morning, having convinced Mr. Henderson that they wanted to see the documentation themselves. You're looking for any filings related to HOA boundary expansions, Mr. Henderson had instructed. Property line disputes, development plans, anything that mentions your address. It's all public record, so they have to show you. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Susan, seemed surprised when they explained what they wanted. That's a lot of documents, she warned. Could take hours to go through. We have time, Marcus said. They set up in a small research room, surrounded by stacks of papers, property maps, and filing records. For 2 hours, they found nothing unusual, just standard HOA documentation, boundary surveys, the typical bureaucracy of development. Then Nia found it. Marcus, look at this. She'd pulled up a digital file on the public computer, a scanned document dated October 15, 2022. It was the boundary expansion petition Mr. Henderson had mentioned, requesting that properties along Meadowbrook Lane be properly incorporated into the HOA jurisdiction. But it wasn't the petition itself that caught Nia's attention. It was the signature at the bottom, supposedly from Daniel Williams, consenting to the inclusion of his property. That's not Dad's signature, Nia said, pointing. Look at the D. Dad always makes it with that little loop at the top. And the Williams, the W is all wrong. Marcus looked closer. She was right. He'd seen his father's signature 1,000 times on permission slips, birthday cards, mortgage papers. This wasn't it. They forged it, he breathed. Keep looking, Nia said urgently. If they forged one thing, maybe they forged others. They dug deeper, spreading papers across the table, marking pages with sticky notes. The more they found, the clearer the picture became. There was a property assessment, supposedly conducted with Daniel's permission, that declared the house structurally unsound and recommended demolition. But the assessment was dated in March, when Daniel had already been deployed for 2 months. No one had been home to let an assessor inside. There was a form stating the property had been abandoned for more than 90 days, signed by someone Marcus had never heard of, certifying they'd visited the property and found it empty. But Marcus and Nia had been living there the whole time. There were photos, supposedly of code violations, that showed neglect and disrepair that didn't match their property at all. Marcus recognized some of the images. They'd been taken at the old Peterson place before it was demolished, not at their farm. "This is fraud," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "This is actually fraud." Susan, the clerk, had been watching them work. She approached their table quietly. "You kids finding what you need." "More than we wanted to," Nia muttered. Susan glanced at the papers spread out, then lowered her voice. "I shouldn't say this, but you're not the first black family to come in here looking at HOA records. Last year there was another case, the Johnsons over on Elm Street. Same HOA, similar issues. They eventually sold and moved away." "Why didn't they fight?" Marcus asked. "They tried, but they didn't have proof like you're finding." And Susan hesitated. "Mr. Thornton, the HOA president, he's got connections. Friends in the county office, the zoning board, places like that. Not everyone, but enough to make things difficult for people he wants out." "That's corruption," Nia said. "That's politics, honey," Susan replied sadly. "But maybe with what you're finding, someone will finally pay attention, make copies of everything, and be careful who you talk to about this." They spent another hour copying documents, photographing records, building a case. By the time they left, they had a folder 2 inches thick with evidence. "We need to show this to Mr. Henderson," Marcus said, clutching the folder as they walked to their truck. "This proves they're lying." "It proves more than that," Nia said. "It proves they're targeting people, us specifically. This isn't just about development, this is about driving us out." That evening, they spread everything out on Mr. Henderson's dining room table. The old lawyer went through each document carefully, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is actionable," he said finally. "This is very actionable. Forgery, fraud, making false statements to county officials. This could bring criminal charges, not just civil penalties." "So we can stop the sale?" Marcus asked hopefully. "Oh, we can stop the sale," Mr. Henderson confirmed. "But more than that, we can expose what they're doing. We can make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." He paused, looking at both of them seriously. "But I want you to understand something. This is going to get ugly. These people have money and influence. When we file this, they're going to fight back, and they're going to fight dirty. They'll try to discredit you, threaten you, maybe worse. Are you sure you want to do this?" Marcus thought about his great-grandfather, working double shifts for 23 years to buy this land. He thought about his father, somewhere overseas, trusting him to protect their home. He thought about all the families like theirs who'd been pushed out, silenced, erased from communities they'd helped build. "We're sure," he said. Nia nodded firmly. "We're not going anywhere." The next day, Mr. Henderson filed their emergency motion with the county court, along with all the evidence of fraud. He also sent copies to the state attorney general's office and to a reporter at the Philadelphia Tribune who specialized in housing discrimination cases. The response was immediate and explosive. That night, Marcus's phone rang with an unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Marcus Williams?" The voice was male, smooth, authoritative. "Who is this?" "This is Richard Thornton. I'm the president of the Meadowbrook HOA. I think we need to talk." Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. "I don't have anything to say to you." "That's unfortunate, because I have quite a bit to say to you." Thornton's voice hardened. "You and your sister have made some very serious accusations, false accusations. Defamatory accusations. They're not false, and you know it," Marcus shot back. "What I know," Thornton said coldly, "is that you're 2 children playing with fire. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Your father is overseas, unreachable. You're alone. Do you really think you can fight this?" "We're not alone," Marcus said, "and we're not backing down." There was a long silence. When Thornton spoke again, his voice was low and threatening. "You're making a mistake, a big one. This could have been easy. We offered you a fair price, a clean exit. Now we're going to bury you in legal fees and fines. We're going to drag your father's name through the mud. We're going to make sure everyone knows what kind of family you are, deadbeats who can't maintain property, troublemakers who make wild accusations, people who don't belong in a respectable community." "See, that's where you're wrong," Marcus said, surprising himself with his own calm. "We do belong. We belonged here before your HOA existed. Before your fancy houses were even built, and we're going to be here long after you're gone." He hung up before Thornton could respond, his heart pounding. "Was that him?" Nia asked from the doorway. "Yeah, he's scared." "Good," Nia said. "He should be." Part 5, set up the court hearing was scheduled for September 10, 5 days before the property sale date. Mr. Henderson explained that they'd be arguing for an emergency injunction to halt the sale while the fraud allegations were investigated. "The evidence is on our side," he said during one of their preparation meetings. "But we need to be prepared for anything. Thornton has hired a big law firm out of Pittsburgh. They're going to argue that this is just a property dispute, that the HOA acted in good faith, and that any irregularities in the paperwork are minor clerical errors." "Minor?" Nia nearly shouted. "They forged Dad's signature." "I know, sweetheart, and we're going to prove that. But they're going to try to paint you two as confused kids who are misinterpreting the situation. That's why your testimony is so important. You need to be clear, confident, and factual." Marcus spent hours practicing with Mr. Henderson, going over every document, every detail, preparing for the questions the HOA's lawyers would ask. It was exhausting and terrifying, but he couldn't stop. Too much was riding on this. Meanwhile, the community response to their fight was mixed. Some neighbors were supportive. Mrs. Patterson organized a small group of older residents who remembered Samuel Williams and the farm's history. They planned to attend the hearing to show support, but others were hostile. Marcus and Nia received anonymous letters telling them to just take the money and leave. Someone spray-painted "foreclosure" on their mailbox. A post appeared on the neighborhood Facebook group claiming the Williams kids were troublemakers who were dragging down property values. On September 7, 3 days before the hearing, something happened that changed everything. Marcus was in the barn doing evening chores when he heard Nia scream. He ran outside to find her standing in the driveway, staring at their truck. All 4 tires had been slashed, and across the windshield, someone had spray-painted, "Leave or else." Marcus called the police. 2 officers arrived, took photos, wrote up a report. But their attitude suggested this was a teenage prank, nothing serious, certainly nothing connected to the HOA dispute. "You kids been having problems with anyone at school?" one officer asked. "This isn't about school," Marcus said, frustrated. "This is about people trying to force us off our property." The officer exchanged a look with his partner. "Son, I think you've been watching too many movies. This is just vandalism, happens all the time." After they left, Marcus and Nia sat on the porch, exhausted and frightened. The evening was cooling down, crickets singing in the fields, but Marcus felt no peace. "Maybe we should call Dad," Nia said quietly. "Let him know what's happening." Marcus had been avoiding this. Daniel had enough stress overseas without worrying about home, but maybe Nia was right. Maybe they needed him to know. That night, Marcus sent an email through his father's military account, not knowing when or if Daniel would receive it. He tried to keep it factual, not alarming, but honest about the situation. He explained the HOA's actions, the fraud they'd discovered, the hearing scheduled for September 10. "We're handling it," he wrote. "Mr. Henderson is helping, but I wanted you to know in case something happens. We're not giving up the farm, no matter what. This is our land, your land, great-grandpa's land, and we're going to keep it." He hit send and hoped his father would understand. The day before the hearing, Mr. Henderson called an urgent meeting. They gathered in his office Marcus, Nia, Mrs. Patterson, and a few other community members who'd been supporting their fight. "I have some news," Mr. Henderson said. "The reporter I contacted at the Tribune, she's been investigating, and she's found something significant." He pulled up a news article on his computer, dated that morning. "Pattern of predatory HOA practices target minority property owners in Meadowbrook County." The article detailed cases like theirs, Black and Latino families who'd been pressured out of their properties through aggressive HOA actions, questionable legal proceedings, and harassment. The Johnson family Susan had mentioned. The Rodriguez family who'd lost their home to unpaid fines that were later found to be improperly assessed. 3 other cases with similar patterns, and at the center of all of them, Richard Thornton and the Meadowbrook HOA. "This is bigger than just us," Nia said, reading the article. "Much bigger," Mr. Henderson confirmed. "The state attorney general's office is now investigating. They're looking at potential civil rights violations, housing discrimination, racketeering charges." "What does this mean for tomorrow?" Marcus asked. "It means the stakes just got higher for everyone involved," Mr. Henderson said. "Thornton and the HOA board are going to be desperate to make this go away. They might try to settle, offer you a deal to drop the case and keep quiet." "We're not interested," Marcus said immediately. "I know, but I want you to hear them out if they make an offer, not because I think you should take it, but because you need to understand what they're willing to admit to, what they're most afraid of." Mrs. Patterson spoke up, her voice firm despite her age. "These children need to know that we stand with them, all of us. We remember when Black folks couldn't buy property in this county at all. We remember the fights, the sacrifices, what Samuel Williams did buying this land, building that farm that was radical, that was resistance, and these babies are carrying on that legacy. She looked at Marcus and Nia with fierce pride. You hold your heads high tomorrow, you tell your truth. And you remember that you're not alone in this fight. That night, Marcus barely slept. He kept going over his testimony, reviewing the documents, imagining all the ways things could go wrong. Around midnight, he gave up on sleep and went downstairs, intending to make tea. He found Nia already in the kitchen, sitting at the table with one of their father's photo albums open in front of her. Can't sleep either, Marcus asked. Keep thinking about great-grandpa, Nia said, turning a page to show a black-and-white photo of Samuel Williams standing in front of the newly built farmhouse, pride evident in his stance despite the grainy quality of the image. He fought so hard for this, and now we have to fight for it all over again. Marcus sat beside her, looking at the photo. Dad told me once that great-grandpa used to say, they can take everything from a man except his land and his word. That's why he was so careful about documentation, about property rights, about keeping everything legal and recorded. Because he knew people would try to take it, Nia finished. Yeah, and he was right. They sat together in the quiet kitchen, looking at photos of their family's history, Samuel and his wife Emma on their wedding day, Daniel as a young boy playing in the yard, their mother laughing in the garden, generation after generation tied to this land. Going to win tomorrow, Nia said with sudden certainty. We have to, because if we don't, then what was it all for? All those years, all that work, all that sacrifice. Marcus closed the album gently. We'll win because we're telling the truth, and because we're not alone, we've got generations backing us up. And because we're Williams' kids, Nia added with a small smile. And Williams' kids don't quit. Never, Marcus agreed. As they headed back to bed, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The fear was still there, but it was accompanied by something stronger, determination, resolve, the knowledge that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Tomorrow they'd face the HOA in court. They'd present their evidence, tell their story, and demand justice. Not just for themselves, but for every family who'd been pushed out before them and every family who might face this threat in the future. The Williams farm had stood for 76 years. Any luck and a lot of fight, it would stand for 76 more. Part 6. Climactic reversal. The Meadowbrook County Courthouse was intimidating, all marble and echoing hallways, designed to make ordinary people feel small. Marcus and Nia walked in flanked by Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Patterson, trying to look more confident than they felt. The courtroom was already filling up. On one side sat Richard Thornton and the HOA board, surrounded by a team of lawyers in expensive suits. Thornton was exactly what Marcus had imagined. Mid-50s, silver hair, the kind of face that probably smiled at country club lunches while destroying people's lives. He was talking animatedly with his lead attorney, occasionally glancing toward Marcus and Nia with barely concealed contempt. On the other side, a growing crowd of supporters was gathering. Mrs. Patterson and her friends from the Historical Society, the reporter from the Tribune with her notebook ready. Several families Marcus didn't recognize, but who Mr. Henderson quietly identified as other families the HOA had targeted. And in the back row, standing against the wall because all the seats were full, was someone Marcus hadn't expected. Staff Sergeant Daniel Williams in his Army uniform, looking tired but solid as a rock. Dad, Nia's voice cracked. She was across the courtroom and in her father's arms before Marcus could process what he was seeing. Daniel hugged her tight, then reached out to pull Marcus into the embrace. Emergency leave, he said quietly. Got your email 2 days ago. Took me 30 hours to get here, but I wasn't going to miss this. You shouldn't have come, Marcus said, even as relief flooded through him. We had it under control. I know you did, Daniel said, pride evident in his voice. Henderson caught me up on everything you've done. You've both been incredible, but this isn't something you should face alone. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Martha Reynolds took the bench, a black woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she suffered no fools. Marcus felt a flicker of hope at her presence. This is an emergency hearing regarding property at 1847 Meadowbrook Lane, Judge Reynolds began. The HOA is seeking to proceed with a foreclosure sale scheduled for September 15. The property owners are seeking an injunction to halt the sale and have made serious allegations of fraud. Let's start with the HOA. Counsel, present your argument. The HOA's lead attorney, a man named Sykes, stood smoothly. His presentation was polished, professional, almost convincing. He argued that the Williams property had been properly incorporated into the HOA through standard legal procedures, that Daniel Williams had signed the necessary paperwork. Look, here was his signature. that the property had accumulated legitimate fines for code violations, that the foreclosure was a last resort after months of noncompliance. "The fact is, Your Honor," Sykes concluded, "this is simply a case of a family that hasn't maintained HOA standards and hasn't paid their required fees. It's unfortunate, but the law is clear. The HOA has the right to enforce its rules and collect its dues." Judge Reynolds made some notes. "And the allegations of fraud?" Sykes waved a dismissive hand. "Unfounded accusations from confused minors who don't understand the legal complexities of property law. There's no evidence of any wrongdoing, and frankly, these allegations are bordering on defamatory." "I see. Mr. Henderson." Mr. Henderson rose, and Marcus noticed he moved differently than Sykes, slower, more deliberate, but with an authority that came from decades of experience. "Your Honor, with your permission, I'd like to call Marcus Williams to the stand." Marcus's heart hammered as he was sworn in. From the witness stand, the courtroom looked even more intimidating. He could see Thornton staring at him with cold calculation, Daniel watching with encouragement, Nia with her hands clasped nervously. Mr. Henderson approached gently. "Marcus, how old are you?" 16, sir." "And how long have you lived at 1847 Meadowbrook Lane?" "My whole life. It's my father's house, my grandfather's before that. My great-grandfather Samuel Williams built it in 1947. "Tell us what happened when your father deployed this year." Marcus took a deep breath and began. He described their father's departure, the responsibilities he and Nia had taken on, the sudden appearance of the HOA letters. He detailed each escalation, the violations, the threats, the harassment. "And then you discovered something, didn't you?" Mr. Henderson prompted. "Yes, sir. We went to the county records office and found the documents the HOA had filed, and we found—" Marcus pulled out the evidence folder. "We found that they'd forged my father's signature on multiple documents." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Sykes jumped to his feet. "Objection, that's a serious accusation without foundation." "I have foundation," Marcus said, his voice stronger now. He held up two documents side by side. "This is my father's real signature from his property deed filed in 2015. And this is the signature on the HOA consent form, supposedly signed in October 2022. They're not the same." Judge Reynolds gestured for the documents. "Bring them here." She examined both papers carefully, then looked at Daniel in the back of the courtroom. Staff Sergeant Williams approached the bench. Daniel walked forward, and Judge Reynolds showed him the documents. "Is this your signature on the HOA form?" Daniel studied it, then shook his head firmly. "No, Your Honor, that's not my signature. I've never signed any document consenting to join an HOA. I was overseas in October 2022, and no one had my authorization to sign on my behalf." The courtroom exploded in whispered conversation. Judge Reynolds banged her gavel. "Order! Mr. Sykes, do you have an explanation for this?" Sykes had lost his smooth confidence. He conferred urgently with Thornton, who was now red-faced and visibly agitated. "Your Honor, there must be some explanation, perhaps an administrative error in the filing." "An administrative error?" Judge Reynolds' voice was sharp. "A forged signature is not an administrative error, counsel. It's fraud. We would need handwriting analysis to definitively—" "Then we'll get it," the judge interrupted. "But right now, I'm looking at two signatures that are clearly different." "What else do you have, Mr. Henderson?" Mr. Henderson presented document after document, and Marcus explained each one. The property assessment conducted when no one was home. The abandonment certification claiming the house was empty when Marcus and Nia were living there. The photos of violations that showed a completely different property. With each piece of evidence, Sykes's objections grew weaker and Thornton's expression grew darker. Then Mr. Henderson played his final card. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a recent investigative report by the Philadelphia Tribune, documenting a pattern of similar actions by this same HOA against multiple minority property owners." He distributed copies of the article. "The Rodriguez family foreclosed on for unpaid fines in 2021. The Johnson family forced to sell in 2022 after mounting harassment. The Chen family currently fighting similar violations." In every case, we see the same pattern: properties owned by Black, Latino, or Asian families targeted for aggressive HOA action, ultimately forced out through foreclosure or pressure sales. And in every case, the HOA president was Richard Thornton. Sykes was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is completely irrelevant to the case at hand." "It's absolutely relevant," Judge Reynolds countered. "It goes to pattern and practice. It goes to motive." Mr. Henderson, continue. "The pattern is clear, Your Honor. Mr. Thornton has been systematically targeting minority-owned properties in historically diverse neighborhoods, using HOA rules as a weapon to force sales. then developing the land into high-end housing. It's gentrification through legal harassment. It's housing discrimination under the guise of community standards. Mr. Henderson turned to address the full courtroom. And it's exactly the kind of thing that laws like the Fair Housing Act were designed to prevent. What happened to the Williams family isn't just fraud, it's a civil rights violation. The courtroom was silent. Judge Reynolds looked from the evidence before her to Thornton, who was now whispering urgently with his lawyers. "Your Honor," Sykes said desperately, "my client wishes to address the court." Judge Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Your client is welcome to take the stand and be cross-examined." Sykes paled. "Perhaps not the stand, but if he could then he can sit down and stay quiet," Judge Reynolds said flatly. She gathered the documents before her. "I'm going to say something, and I want everyone to listen carefully." The courtroom leaned forward as one. "I've been on this bench for 17 years, Judge Reynolds continued. "And in that time, I've seen a lot of property disputes. But I've rarely seen evidence of fraud this clear-cut, and I've never seen such blatant targeting of minority homeowners." She fixed Thornton with a hard stare. "Mr. Thornton, you're not just a real estate developer. You're not just an HOA president. Based on the evidence presented today, you're a predator who has been using legal mechanisms to steal property from families who have every right to their homes." Thornton started to speak, but Judge Reynolds held up her hand. "The Williams family has owned that property for 76 years. They've paid for it, maintained it, raised generations on it. It represents everything this country supposedly stands for: the American dream, the right to own property, the ability to build generational wealth. And you've tried to take it from them using lies, forgery, and intimidation." She signed something with a sharp stroke of her pen. "The foreclosure sale is hereby permanently enjoined. The HOA's claim to jurisdiction over the Williams property is null and void based on fraudulent documentation, and I'm referring this entire matter to the State Attorney General for criminal investigation." A cheer went up from the supporters' side of the courtroom. Mrs. Patterson was crying. The reporter was scribbling furiously, but Judge Reynolds wasn't done. "Furthermore, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order against the Meadowbrook HOA and specifically against Richard Thornton, prohibiting any contact with the Williams family or their property. Any violation will result in immediate contempt charges." She looked at Marcus and Nia. "You two are incredibly brave. What you've done investigating this, gathering evidence, standing up for your family's rights, that takes courage. You should be proud." Then she looked at Daniel. "Sergeant, thank you for your service, and thank you for raising children who understand the meaning of justice and fighting for what's right. Your father and grandfather would be proud." Sykes was gathering his papers frantically. "Your Honor, my client wishes to express. Your client can express it to the Attorney General." Judge Reynolds cut him off. "This hearing is adjourned." Part 7, Resolution. The aftermath of the court hearing unfolded over the following weeks like a slowly settling storm. Richard Thornton resigned from the HOA board 3 days after the hearing, citing health reasons. Word spread quickly that the state attorney general's investigation had expanded to include not just the Williams case, but a broader pattern of housing discrimination across multiple counties. Criminal charges were pending. The HOA itself went through a complete restructuring. Several board members resigned. The organization hired a new management company and issued formal apologies to every family that had been targeted, including offers to refund all fines and legal fees. For Marcus and Nia, life slowly returned to something resembling normal but changed, somehow deeper and more purposeful. Daniel's emergency leave extended into a month as he worked with military support services to arrange a hardship transfer that would keep him stateside. He'd done his time overseas, the Army agreed. He'd earned the right to stay home with his kids. On a Saturday morning in early October, the Williams family hosted a gathering at the farm. It was Mrs. Patterson's idea, a celebration, she called it, though it felt more like a reckoning with history. The Rodriguez family came, and the Johnsons and the Chens, other families who'd been pushed out of their homes or who'd come close. Mr. Henderson was there, of course, and the reporter from the Tribune who'd continued covering the story as the investigation widened. They set up tables on the lawn, under the old oak trees Samuel had planted as saplings. Daniel grilled hamburgers and hot dogs while Mrs. Patterson organized a potluck that groaned with dishes from a dozen different traditions: collard greens and arroz con pollo, dumplings and potato salad, bibimbap and mac and cheese. Marcus stood at the edge of the gathering, watching the children run through the fields he'd grown up in, listening to adults share stories of their own fights for housing justice. It felt surreal how quickly their personal struggle had become part of something larger. "You did good, son." Marcus turned to find his father beside him, 2 plates of food balanced in his hands. He offered one to Marcus. "I didn't really do anything," Marcus said. "Just refused to give up." "That's everything," Daniel corrected. "Refusing to give up when everyone expects you to, that's where change starts. Your great-grandfather understood that. It's why he bought this land in the first place." They ate in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Nia teach some of the younger kids how to collect eggs from the chicken coop. "I was scared," Marcus admitted. "The whole time, I kept thinking about what would happen if we lost, if they took the farm, if I'd let you down." "You could never let me down," Daniel said firmly. "Never, but I'll tell you what does scare me, the thought of my kids growing up not knowing their own strength, not understanding their power to change things when things are wrong." He gestured to the gathering. "Look at this. You exposed systematic discrimination. You helped launch an investigation that's going to protect dozens, maybe hundreds of families. You stood up in court and told the truth when people twice your age would have backed down." "That's not nothing, Marcus. That's everything." Mrs. Patterson approached them, moving slowly but with that same fierce energy she'd shown throughout the fight. "Daniel, bring your kids. We're doing something." She led them to the front porch, where someone had set up a microphone, probably overkill for the 30 or so people gathered, but Mrs. Patterson clearly had plans. She waited for the crowd to settle, then spoke. "We're here today to celebrate a victory," she began, "but also to remember why this victory matters. What happened to the Williams family isn't new. It's an old story repeated in new ways. The tactics change, but the goal stays the same. Push black folks off their land, out of their homes, away from the wealth and stability that property ownership provides." She paused, letting her words settle. "Samuel Williams bought this land in 1947. Y'all young folks might not realize what that meant back then. Black man buying 40 acres in a white community. That was revolutionary, that was dangerous. Samuel got threats, faced harassment, dealt with people trying to drive him out every way they could think of. But he stayed," Mrs. Patterson continued. "He planted his roots deep. He built this house with his own hands. He raised his family here and passed this land to his son, who passed it to his son. That's generational wealth. That's legacy. That's the American dream they told us we couldn't have." She looked at Marcus and Nia. "And when someone tried to steal it, using fancy legal language and HOA rules instead of burning crosses, but the intent was the same, these 2 babies said no. They investigated, they fought, they won." Mrs. Patterson pulled out a document, officially sealed and ribboned. "The Meadowbrook Historical Society has voted unanimously to designate the Williams Farm as a historical site. We're placing a marker here telling Samuel's story, making sure everyone who drives past knows what this land represents." She handed the certificate to Daniel, who looked stunned. "Mrs. Patterson, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep fighting," she replied. "Say you'll teach these children that their heritage matters. Say you'll remember that every inch of this land was fought for and that every generation has to keep fighting to protect it." "I will," Daniel promised. "We all will." The celebration continued into the evening. As the sun set, casting golden light across the fields, someone started playing music, old soul tunes that Samuel's generation had danced to. People began to drift home, but not before embracing the Williams family, sharing their own stories, promising to stay in touch. That night, after everyone had left and the cleanup was done, Marcus found himself back on the porch where this had all started. Nia joined him, settling into the swing their grandfather had built. "You know what Mr. Henderson told me?" Nia said. "He said the Attorney General's office is using our case as a model for investigating HOA discrimination across the state. They're looking at patterns, questioning approval processes, making sure this doesn't happen to other families." "Good," Marcus said simply. "He also said we should think about applying for the state youth advocacy program. Said we showed the kind of leadership and commitment they look for." Marcus considered this. A month ago, he'd just been a kid trying to get through sophomore year. Now people were calling him an advocate, a leader, a champion for justice. It felt too big, too important for someone who'd just been trying to save his family's home. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the biggest changes started with people just trying to protect what was theirs. "What do you think?" Nia pressed. "Would you want to do something like that? Keep fighting for other families?" Marcus looked out at the land stretching before them, 40 acres of history, struggle, and triumph. In his mind, he could see Samuel Williams walking these same fields, young and strong and determined. He could see his grandfather teaching his father to farm, passing down knowledge and legacy. He could see his father in uniform, fighting for a country that didn't always fight for him, but believing in the possibility of justice anyway. "Yeah," Marcus said finally. I think I would. Someone fought for us to be here. Maybe we owe it to others to fight for them too, Nia smiled. William's kids don't quit. Never, Marcus agreed. Inside the house, Daniel was video calling family members, sharing the day's events with relatives scattered across the country. Through the window, Marcus could hear his father's laugh, warm and relieved, the sound of a man who'd been carrying weight for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down. The historical marker would go up in a few weeks, Mrs. Patterson had said. Bronze plaques with Samuel's story, the farm's history, its significance to the community. People would read it and know that this land meant something, that the Williams family meant something. But Marcus thought the real marker was something else. It was in the way Nia sat a little straighter now, more confident in her own power. It was in the way their father looked at them with pride mixed with something like awe. It was in the calls and messages they'd received from other families, thanking them, asking for advice, finding hope in their story. It was in the knowledge that when someone tried to erase them, they'd fought back and won. You know what Mom used to say? Nia asked suddenly. Marcus shook his head. She said that land remembers. That every tear and every celebration, every struggle and every triumph, it all soaks into the soil. She said that's why this place always felt peaceful, even when things were hard, because it remembered love. Marcus thought about that, the idea of land holding memory, carrying history in its very dirt. He thought about Samuel breaking ground on this house, about his grandfather's workshop where they still stored his tools, about his mother's garden that still bloomed every spring with the perennials she'd planted years ago. I think she was right, he said softly. The night deepened around them, bringing crickets and fireflies and the rustle of wind through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The farm was settling in for sleep, as it had for 76 years, as it would for 76 more. Marcus thought about everything they'd learned in the past few months, about corruption and courage, about how systems that seemed permanent could be challenged and changed, about the importance of documentation, evidence, truth-telling, about how two teenagers could stand up to power and win. But more than that, he'd learned that he came from fighters. That resistance was his inheritance, passed down like the deed to this land. That Samuel Williams hadn't just bought property, he'd bought possibility, protection, a foundation for future generations to build on. And that when that foundation was threatened, defending it wasn't just about keeping a house or saving 40 acres. It was about honoring every sacrifice that had made this moment possible. It was about saying to the world, we matter, our history matters, our future matters. It was about refusing to be erased. We should get some sleep, Nia said eventually, stretching. School tomorrow, Marcus laughed. Yeah, back to regular life. Is there such a thing anymore? Nia asked with a grin. Probably not, Marcus admitted, but maybe that's okay. They headed inside where Daniel had finished his calls and was making tea. He pulled both kids into a hug and they stood there in the kitchen, 3 generations removed from Samuel Williams but carrying his legacy forward. I'm proud of you both, Daniel said quietly. I know I've said it before, but I need you to really hear it. What you did, the investigation, the courage, the determination, that's going to stay with me forever. You saved our home, you honored our family, and you helped a lot of other families in the process. We learned from the best, Marcus said. Daniel smiled. Your great-grandfather used to tell me something when I was about your age. He said, boy, they're going to spend your whole life trying to convince you that you don't deserve what you have. Your job is to know better. He paused. You two know better, don't ever forget that. As they headed upstairs to bed, Marcus paused at his great-grandfather's photo in the hallway, the same one Nia had shown him from the album, Samuel standing proud in front of the newly built farmhouse. In the photo, Samuel's expression was serious but not grim, determined but not defeated. Marcus saw himself in that expression, saw Nia, saw his father, saw the through line of strength that had carried them all to this moment. We did good, didn't we, great-grandpa? He whispered to the photo. The house was quiet around him, settling into its foundations, resting on land that had been fought for, protected and preserved, land that remembered. And if Marcus listened very carefully, past the sound of Nia getting ready for bed, past his father moving around downstairs, past the normal noises of a house at night, he could almost hear an answer in the creaking of the old floorboards, in the whisper of wind through the window frames Samuel had built with his own hands. Yes, boy, you did real good. Marcus smiled and headed to bed, ready for whatever came next, because he knew now that the Williams family didn't just own this land. They were part of it as much as the oak trees and the soil and the history soaked into every inch. And no one, not an HOA, not a developer, not anyone could take that away. The farm would stand. The family would endure. The story would continue. And somewhere, generations down the line, another Williams kid would stand on this porch, looking out at these fields and understand the weight and wonder of what they'd been given. They'd know the stories. They'd learn the lessons. They'd carry forward the legacy of resistance, resilience, and refusal to be moved. Because that's what Williams kids did. They stayed, they fought, they won. And they never ever quit. If you've been moved by Marcus and Nia's story, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever faced discrimination in housing or property rights? How did you handle it? Share your story with the Precipistries community below. Your experience might help someone else facing similar struggles. And if you believe in stories that highlight courage, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right, please consider subscribing to our channel. Every subscription helps us continue sharing meaningful narratives that matter. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.